Hello there, you're watching All 24 News World News Program, and up next on tonight's top stories. Algeria rejects a French proposal, calling it provocative as moves advance to prosecute Interior Minister Retailleau for inciting hatred, with threats to take the case to Europe's top court and the UN. Execution of truth. This is what is happening in Gaza. Zionist occupation kills 6 journalists in Gaza Strip, including Anas al-Sharif, while new massacres against displaced and starving leave dozens dead and wounded amid global outrage. Also ahead, calls grow for global action to stop Morocco's normalization policy amid EU complicity warnings. And later, the UN vows to present a roadmap for free, transparent elections in Libya as the Presidential Council backs national reconciliation and the High Council of State reaffirms support for stability-focused dialogue. The details are straight ahead. Welcome back to the program. First off, in our news tonight, Algeria has rejected the French proposal to impose temporary restrictions on accredited Algerian staff accessing restricted areas at Paris airports for diplomatic baggage handling. Informed sources told All 24 News that Algeria insists that the only acceptable solution is to restore permanent entry cards for its diplomatic and consular staff in France, after which it will lift its reciprocal measures. The same sources criticized France's latest proposal on diplomatic baggage handling, calling it a breach of its 1974 bilateral agreement and the Vienna Convention. They dismissed the move as both provocative and ineffective. More on this story with Karim Vazakri.
Algeria is pushing back hard against what it sees as unequal treatment in its relations with France, this time over the handling of diplomatic pouches at Paris airports. According to informed sources who spoke to All 24 News International channel, Algeria has rejected a new French proposal that would introduce temporary restrictions on accredited Algerian staff entering secure airport zones to deliver or collect diplomatic pouches. Algeria says the plan directly breaches France's obligations under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which requires host states to provide all necessary facilities for diplomatic missions to operate freely, as well as the 1974 Algerian-French Agreement. Algeria insists its diplomats should have the same permanent airport security passes granted to other accredited missions. Any exemption, sources argue, is not only discriminatory, but also a violation of international law, specifically Article 27, Paragraph 7 of the Vienna Convention. They point out that France's initial decision to strip Algerian personnel of access cards was itself discriminatory. Now they say Paris is offering a solution that still singles Algeria out and even adds new hurdles. Under the proposed rules, Algerian staff would have to submit a written request to the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs at least 48 hours before handling in a diplomatic pouch and be accompanied at all times by a police officer. The measures apply only to the Algerian embassy in Paris, ignoring consular offices across the country, and have been described by Algerian officials as provocative and a violation of dignity. For Algiers, the issue is about reciprocity, respect, and equality in official relations with Paris.
Hadi Jaoudi, a former head of Nîmes Bar Association, has filed a legal complaint against Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau for hatred, incitement, and discrimination. The case may escalate to the European Court of Human Rights or UN Human Rights Committee if unresolved in French courts. Salman Sev has more.
This space is increasingly shrinking for far-right figures in France, including their ministers. For his part, French Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau's rhetoric, marked by hostility towards several segments of society, has triggered a response from civil society groups and legal professionals. They argue that many of his remarks violate the French constitution and threaten the nation's social cohesion.
Les ministres sont les gardiens du respect de cette constitution.
Ministers are supposed to be the guardians of the Constitution. As lawyers, we've observed that analyzing Mr. Retire's statements, actions and public appearances reveals that he's promoting a singular idea, convincing the entire nation that France should be viewed through only one lens, a shared European origin rooted in Judeo-Christian civilization. Frankly, this reminds us of some of the darkest periods in our history.
Eh bien, ça fait penser tout de même à des périodes troubles de notre histoire.
The French lawyer emphasized that the law is the only means to prevent the situation from worsening and descending into violence, especially since the matter involves discriminatory statements targeting French Muslims.
Le ministre de l'Intérieur va aller au-delà.
The Interior Minister did not stop there. He went even further, repeatedly making discriminatory and offensive remarks. On top of all that, he is making political decisions in the name of the French people, aimed at restricting the freedom of expression of Muslims.
De toutes ces personnes qui sont de confession musulmane.
Such is the case in France, a country where a minister makes a profession of spreading hatred. An extremist, Karen holds the nation's future hostage in service of its political agendas and in pursuit of positioning himself in upcoming elections. It is, in fact, the reality of a country that has built its so-called civilization on the exclusion and exploitation of others without justification.
In a related move, French MP Sabrina Sbaihi reported former Minister Nawal Nenwar to the Paris public prosecutor over her attacks on Algerians. Sbaihi said on her official account that under Article 40 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, she had formally reported public incitement to hatred.
Comparing millions of Algerians to criminals is not an opinion, it is a crime. Hatred and stigmatization cannot be tolerated. For this reason, I am today referring the matter to the public prosecutor of the Republic. These accusations ignore the history and dignity of a people who resisted oppression. Millions of Algerians fought against colonialism, confronted terrorism in the midst of international isolation, and paid the price of their freedom in blood.
Shifting focus to the war on Gaza now, Zionist forces killed 6 journalists, including Al Jazeera's Anas al-Sharif, in targeted strikes near Shifa Hospital. The attack, which also claimed the life of a civilian, marks the latest effort to silence media exposing occupation crimes in the Strip. The Gaza Government Media Office reported that 238 journalists have been murdered since the start of the aggression, condemning the bombing as a deliberate war crime to suppress the truth and hide evidence of genocide. Amnesty International says occupation forces executed journalists in Gaza, including Anas al-Sharif and Mohammed Qaraiqah. The Palestinian Health Ministry warns that Israeli occupation is now planning a hidden massacre as witnesses disappear. SNXT reports now.
لم أتخيل أنها ستأتي هذه اللحظة.
In Gaza, the voices that dared to tell the world the truth are falling silent, not by choice, but by deliberate targeting. 6 Palestinian journalists have been killed in yet another massacre. The tent near Shifa Hospital reduced to rubble in a direct strike by the occupation forces. They were known as witnesses to the truth. Anas al-Sharif, Mohammed Qaraiqah, Mohammed al-Khalidi, Ibrahim Zahar, Mohamed Aliwa and Mohammed Nofel. Their work exposed the crimes of the occupation in the besieged Gaza Strip. Their lives were cut short in an instant.
New crime is being committed against Palestinian journalists, part of a continuous series of attacks since the beginning of Israeli war on Gaza. Journalists themselves are being targeted, and the families of journalists are also being targeted in order to silence their voices.
The occupation seeks to punish journalists for their role in exposing the crimes of genocide, including the deliberate starvation and thirst imposed on our people. This has rallied the world against the occupation, largely because of the deep famine our people are enduring, documented through the reports, photographs and videos produced by Palestinian journalists. This work has undoubtedly placed the occupation in a difficult position, and we have witnessed this targeting as a form of punishment for their professional commitment.
Funeral processions in Gaza carried not only the martyrs, but also a message. The voice of Gaza will not be silenced. Colleagues, young and old, marched with determination to follow in their footsteps, vowing to keep telling the story.
I advise you not to be silent by restrictions, nor to be paralyzed by borders. Be bridges toward the liberation of the country and its people, so that the sun of dignity and freedom may shine over our land.
Every person in Gaza carries a long history of pain, born from loss, deprivation and suffering. When they see the battered tents of the displaced, they remember their own family's tent, how it was torn apart by sudden Israeli bombardment, how they barely managed to save themselves, and how their families' lives were stolen in that same attack.
Since the start of this war, 238 journalists have been killed in a calculated campaign. It began with sealing the strip to foreign media, and it continues with direct strikes on those documenting the reality, part of a wider plan to commit crimes away from the eyes of the world.
This is how we bid farewell to 237 Palestinian journalists. We feel profound sadness and pain, yet we affirm that this mission must continue. We will stand by the victims. We will carry the voices of the grieving mothers through this war.
But even as cameras fall silent, the stories they captured live on a lasting testimony from those who pay the ultimate price for the truth.
In a related news story, at least 15 Palestinians, mostly children, were killed and dozens injured in a series of Zionist bombings targeting homes and tents sheltering displaced families across the Gaza Strip. In Gaza City's Zaytun neighborhood, a couple, their 6 children and another child were killed when their home was blown up, injuring 41 others. Additional strikes killed 3 people south of the city, while an air raid on a Lababidi street claimed the lives of a couple and their child. In Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah, at least 13 more Palestinians were killed, including 7 in a house bombing in the Western camp, and 5, 2 of them children, in a strike east of the city. Adding to that, at least 10 Palestinians were killed by occupation gunfire near 8 centers across Gaza on Monday. In Rafah, 6 were killed near a US-backed aid distribution point, while another died in Khan Yunis. A child was killed and 4 wounded when occupation forces opened fire on crowds south of Wadi Gaza. In the north, 2 were killed near the Zikim crossing as they sought food. Hospitals confirmed receiving the bodies amid the Zionist ongoing blockade, which has pushed Gaza into famine. And speaking of famine, hospitals in Gaza Strip recorded 5 new famine-related deaths, including a child in the past 24 hours, raising the total starvation death toll to 222, the health ministry reported on Monday. At least 101 children are among the victims as the Zionist occupation siege and aid restrictions push Gaza deeper into crisis. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said his country will recognize the state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly in September, stressing that lasting peace depends on establishing a Palestinian state. Meanwhile, New Zealand Foreign Minister Winston Peters announced his government is also considering recognition, with a decision to be presented during UN Leaders' Week.
Today I can confirm that at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September, Australia will recognise the state of Palestine. Australia will recognise the right of the Palestinian people to a state of their own, predicated on the commitments Australia has received from the Palestinian Authority.
we've had a long-standing position, since partition in 1947 to recognise both Palestine and Israel. And clearly, our focus has been, as we've said, when, not if. And as a result, for us, we've got to work through this rather, serious issue, and we've got to do it properly. It's a complex issue. There are strong feelings on all sides of this debate in the public, as you've seen, and it's important that we make the right decision for New Zealand.
Moving on to a different matter now, El Español has demanded urgent political and legal action to stop what it calls Morocco's attempt to legitimize its occupation of Western Sahara through economic projects. The Spanish newspaper criticized the controversial Moroccan plan to lay a submarine cable linking the Canary Islands to Africa's Atlantic coast with a key landing point in Boujdour, a city under occupation. The report titled, Morocco extends cable to the Canary Islands via Western Sahara waters outside the EU framework, denounced the project as dangerous and unacceptable, accusing Rabat of violating Sahrawi self-determination rights and ignoring UN resolutions. The paper warned against normalizing occupation through such initiatives.
The submarine cable is not just a technical project, but rather represents a new tool to consolidate Moroccan control, which requires immediate political and legal action to protect the principle of self-determination and stop the policy of normalizing annexation. In order to preserve justice and the rights of the Sahrawi through this project, Morocco is working to integrate Western Sahara into its national infrastructure in an attempt to limit its control over the region. This is part of a broader policy based on imposing a fait accompli, exploiting natural resources, and signing agreements that ignore international legitimacy.
The Spanish Daily warned that the European Union risks a complicity in violating international law if it fails to take a clear stand against the Moroccan occupation's practices in Western Sahara.
The project, scheduled to be operational by 2026, is being implemented without the slightest consideration for the legal status of the territory and explicitly ignores the international role and the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination, in addition to its violation of the rulings issued by the European Court of Justice, which required the Polisario of France approval of any agreements concerning the Sahrawi territories.
More regional news in Libya now. The Libyan Presidential Council voiced full support for an initiative to lay practical foundations for national reconciliation, ensuring all segments of society help shape the country's future and achieve political stability. Council member Abdullah Al-Lafi met Sunday with the Dialogue and Reconciliation team, which presented its objectives, timeline, and implementation plan. Al-Lafi praised the effort, stressing the need to enhance its effectiveness, ensuring continuity and integrated with other national initiatives. Libya's High Council of State reaffirmed Monday its support for any dialogue that fosters stability and broadens political participation. In a meeting in Tripoli with UN envoy Hannah Teta, Council President Mohammed Takala stressed the need for Libyan ownership of the political process to guide the country towards stability and prosperity.
The President of the High Council of State, Dr. Mohammed Takala, affirmed his commitment to supporting any dialogue process that achieves stability and enhances national participation. He stressed the importance of Libyan ownership of the political process, and it should aim to move Libyans toward achieving stability and prosperity.
UN envoy Hannah Teta stressed the need for a consensual and stable climate to hold elections safely. Meeting Sunday with Abdulhamid Dabeiba, she outlined the mission's plan to support dialogue, complete the transition on a solid legal and constitutional basis, and pave the way for widely accepted, free, and transparent elections. Looking Eastern Europe now, Russian media reported Monday that 3 people were killed and several others injured in a Ukrainian attack targeting multiple regions, including Nizhny Novgorod, the Moscow area, and nearby Tula. Sources said the strikes hit various locations, causing casualties of varying severity. The Russian Defense Ministry announced Monday that its forces had seized the town of Luna-Cherskoye in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region. It said the advance is part of Moscow's plan to create a buffer zone between Russian and Ukrainian territories. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said Sunday that Washington is working to set a date for talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He stressed that President Donald Trump's meeting with Putin would not be productive before meeting Zelensky, reaffirming the U.S. push for a settlement acceptable to both sides.
One of the most important logjams is that Vladimir Putin said that he would never sit down with Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, and the president has now got that to change. We're at a point now where we're now trying to figure out, frankly, scheduling and things like that around when these three leaders could sit down and discuss an end to this conflict.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday urged greater pressure on Russia, accusing it of dragging out the war. In a post on X platform, he said concessions would not convince Moscow to end its aggression. Ahead of Friday's summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska, U.S. President Donald Trump said he expects a productive meeting to end the war in Ukraine, while lashing out at Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for refusing to cede territory to Russia. The U.S. President voiced his frustration during a Monday press conference on security measures in Washington.
Over the weekend, we confronted a lot of very bad people, but this is an emergency. This is a tragic emergency, and it's embarrassing for me to be up here. You know, I'm going to see Putin. I'm going to Russia on Friday. I don't like being up here talking about how unsafe and how dirty and disgusting this once beautiful capital was.
Let's catch up on more international news stories with Sufyan Kanturi in the News in Brief.
At least 40 people were killed and 19 injured when NRC forces stormed Abu Shuk camp on the outskirts of Al-Fasher in Sudan's Darfur region. On U.S.-China relations, President Donald Trump described talks with Beijing as good, just hours before the tariff truce was set to expire, adding that he plans to impose new tariffs on Chinese imports in response to Beijing's continued purchase of Russian oil. North Korean Defense Minister No Kwang-chol vowed a firm response to upcoming U.S.-South Korean military drills, which Pyongyang's defense ministry called a serious threat to its national security. Colombian senator and presidential hopeful Miguel Uribe has died 2 months after being shot in the head in a targeted attack which shocked the South American nation. The 39-year-old was hit by 3 bullets, 2 of them in the head and 1 in the leg, at a campaign rally on June 7th in the capital Bogota.
And that wraps up our news program for tonight. For more updates, you can always visit our social media platforms as well as our website. I'm Islam Sid signing off. Good night.